Okay, so my name is Scott Chalmers. I work for the province of Manitoba, and I manage a research farm called Westman Agricultural Diversification Organization, and we are located in Melita. And I just put up this map to give perspective of how far away we're talking from each other. Um, it's quite far. Mind you, we are pretty close in a certain growing degree day here. Or maybe a little warmer, but with climate change, I think we are getting warmer and warmer. It's starting to show down here. We're starting to lose snow pretty quick, um, just as a perspective. But I think what I tried to do with my presentation is give some examples that might work up in your country, um, just because there's no point in talking about soybeans, for example, maybe unless they're being used for grazing. This is just a little look at kind of our research farm. This is from 2019, but it's a nice photo. You can see a wide diversity of crops. So we work with, the standard crops, but we've actually worked with up to 150 crops. We're called a diversification center. So our job is trying to figure out which ones work and which ones don't. Here's the crew. Without them, obviously, I wouldn't be here today talking about it and all their hard work in the field. That's just kind of our capacity. That is not our seeder. We would love to see one of those, but we live beside a John Deere facility, so it's easy to take photos like that. Just to consider, there's lots of things to consider when you're thinking about intercropping, and these are my top 11. Think of your time and your labor. That accounts for something. I know Dan was talking about crop compatibility, and that really is important, and that can make it or break it. I'll give you a few examples later. Marketing constraints are often overlooked. This is where you take it to the buyer and they reject it because it has some sort of lentil chip in it or an allergen that they weren't planning on having. So I've heard of, for example, flax being rejected because of lentil chips. And this can easily happen if you have soybean in your system because it's an allergen. Crop rotation, I know Russell was talking about doing it over and over and over, was a three-way mix. I don't know. My advice would be just to start small, like do 10 acres or 20 acres and try it and see if it does work. Because if you're committed to doing it every year anyway in other fields, you can just do it on a small spot over and over. The pesticides, I know you guys are organic, but on our side, on conventional, it makes it difficult. It really narrows it down to what you can use. And so you almost end up doing kind of quasi-organic because a lot of times there's no options. And probably the most important point here, number 6, available soil moisture and residual soil nutrient levels. So make sure you're doing soil tests in the fall, because if you are high in nitrates, those legumes are just going to get lazy and do nothing, and they're just going to use up that fertility level that could have been used by a non-fixer. What you want to see is about 40 pounds or less in your soil test. And then with the soil moisture, I'm not sure what you guys are at for snowfall this winter, but if you're going into spring on the dry side, now is not the time to organic or to intercrop, because I will tell you later in our presentation that intercrops use more water. And once you enter into sort of a deficiency state on water, the plants become more parasitic on each other, and they end up becoming double losers if you're using 2 crops, because they just start fighting with each other, and it's just better to have 1 crop. I've seen that many times. But in the event that you're in a wet spring, or you're expecting to be more in a wet season like this year where we're transitioning out of El Nino, this could be a good time to get into intercropping because of the soil moisture. Of course, cleaning is a challenge. Make sure you can do so. and have at least a responsible crop that will pay for that cleaning. Then, of course, can you seed these crops? Do you have the openers? Can you do it in one pass? Crop insurance, I know Russell mentioned that. We do have options here in Manitoba. It's called polycrop or mixed crop. It's just like $9 or $10 an acre for insurance. But I guess it's something better than nothing. There's also GARS, which is like the Global Ag Risk, which insures your income. You can maybe chat with them to see if that's a different way to look at insuring your crop. Return on investment, of course, you got to make money when you're working so hard. And maybe check to see if you have BMP funding available provincially, or probably not federally, but provincially, it's likely available sometimes. And my biggest tip is make sure you have a check strip. And I'm so glad Russell had a check strip there where you could see the manure patches, because that really tells a story of what's going on. There we go. Okay, so I talked about water being very important here. And just for an example, I put up this slide with pea and canola, where their rooting depths are. And so with peas, we're going about, let's see, that's 40 centimeters deep for pea. And then with canola, we're going over 100 centimeters deep with their roots. And actually, Chad Colasini in Manitoba here did his thesis at the U of M and found that canola roots go 200 centimeters deep. And so just to think about where the water is being sourced, and maybe thinking ahead for my presentation here, that the peas and canola are sourcing from different zones. And so if you can imagine in a dry situation, the canola is always going to be searching for water below the root of the pea. And so the pea is going to be shorthanded all the time. But in a wet situation, it's much different. And we proved that here in about 2013. We had a study, and we were able to pick this up in that year where we had pea canola, and anything that was intercrop was using more moisture in that plot compared to the monocrops. But also what this weird phenomenon we found is if we are starting to mix the rows of crops together rather than singulating the crops in separate rows, we were using more water. So having those roots closer together, those interactions used more water for whatever reason. And in 2009, this was our first attempt at pea canola in river flat land, which is the most important part of this slide. We had tremendous yield advantages by having pea canola together. Now, I would say in this situation, there was no deficiency in water. There was continuous rain for the peas, but also that canola was sourcing from the river flatland where the water table was only like 2 feet below ground. And so it was, a crop on steroids, I would call it. We ended up getting a land equivalent ratio of 1.62, which means you need 62% more land to be equivalent for that amount of production. And we've seen it again. This is on highland in 2011, and 2011 was a super wet year. We only had 10% of the acres in this 300 million acre area that were put in the ground. But nonetheless, we managed to get these pea canola plots in the ground, and we had tremendous response, again, looking at about the same amount of land equivalent ratio as we had in the river flatland. So this is in a excessive moisture situation where you're getting double the amount of rainfall for your spring start. And then what's cool about this is mixing the rows again together was a huge advantage compared to alternating crops out into individual rows. So we knew something was up with that too. Here's a couple of local examples in the field. We have a forage pea and an oat. We had noticed, lots of lodging. It actually turned out to be a fantastic crop. It was actually an organic crop. I think they had a 40 bushel pea crop and 30 or 40 bushel oats in that. The challenge was getting to those forage peas, and they had to use a pickup reel, swath it, and then combine it. But it really did work out pretty good. Then we had a lentil mustard situation here in Deloraine, and the farmer, this is a conventional farmer who used a Group 2 herbicide, but the Group 2 herbicide didn't get the wild sunflower in the foreground or in the background, and it was actually quite a mess with that wild sunflower. But they had a decent crop of mustard. The lentil was maybe a little bit outcompeted, but mostly my concern was the sunflower. So I come up with a list here of various crops that work pretty good, in my opinion. So we had pea canola with or without alfalfa, and we usually get a positive land equivalent ratio. When it's dry, it's low at like 1.05, but when it's wet, it's very high at 1.62. And it has many perks, which I might mention later. Pea mustard is very similar as pea canola. We've actually tried to assess if a Phanomyces or a Fusarium root rot complex can be affected by having a companion like canola or mustard because of their glucosinolate interactions, but we weren't able to pick that up. It's possible, but I don't think that interaction in the soil is in real time quick enough to make a difference. A Phanomyces is so aggressive. I'm not sure what you guys have up there for root rot, but if you're going with peas over and over, you're bound to have a Phanomyces, let alone Fusarium, and that could be a huge issue. We have to rotate out of 8 years to get back into peas down here now. We have it. Pea oat, it's another decent mix, getting a land equivalent ratio of 1.1 to 1.5. And you can use this either as grain or like a green feed with the whole plant, and boost your protein by about 2% on your feed. Faba bean oat, I really liked this one. It was really cool, but the land equivalent ratio wasn't a big bang. It was maybe 1.11 at best. But it was easy to harvest, that's for sure. Chickpea flax, I've had very little to do with that in plots, but Saskatchewan has done quite a bit of work, and they've had, really good responses as well, up to 2.0 on the land equivalent ratio, and getting really good Ascochyta disease suppression, I believe. One thing I find with flax is it just gobbles up the water. We've tried it with soybean, and the soybean has failed because of the flax being there, just using up all the water. One of the things I'll probably get to talking about is corn and hairy vetch, and I would only promote this for grazing purposes only. However, we have seen farmers get in with silage units, but it can really clog up the reapers. But we found it improves the feed value quite well by maybe 10 or 15 points, and then changes the field nitrogen economics so that you're producing anywhere from maybe 20 to 30 pounds of nitrogen extra by having the vetch included, above and beyond the needs of the corn plot. Spring wheat and sweet clover, I think this is a great mix. It's really good legume establishment, whether you have it before seeding, during, or after seeding, like with a Velmar, for example. And it has great saline tolerance compared to the spring wheat. And one thing I had just been on a presentation last week with Manitoba Organic Alliance, and we had a producer who grew sweet clover and rolled it with a land roller well, it's a roller crimper at flowering stage, and it killed it dead, created a biomat that they seeded winter wheat into with a disc drill, and had a fantastic 40 bushel winter wheat crop the next year that was spotless with weeds. And I really think potentially that could be an option for you guys up there to roll sweet clover and seed winter wheat into it directly with a disc drill. And if I can get that presentation, I actually was looking for it while you guys were presenting. I'd love to put it in the chat or make it available for Naveen to distribute to you guys. And then we've also worked with rye and hairy vetch, and this is just for seed production, where you seed both the crops together at the same time, harvest them together, and then you separate the seed out and sell the vetch seed, which can be up to, you know, $5 or $6 a pound. So here's just some pictures of those intercrops. We got the chickpea flax top left, faba bean oat top right, the wheat, the spring wheat, sweet clover after a swath there, and then the rye and the vetch. Really, really neat ideas. And with our pea canola results, there's lots of neat things. That's the one we researched the most. Lots of neat things like that mixed rows are the highest yielding compared to, you know, singling the rows out or doubling up the crops or tripling them compared to monocrops. And then Melanie Reed at the U of S did her thesis in 2022, and she was able to prove that there is nitrogen transfer going from the pea to the canola, or it was white mustard at the time. And this is anywhere from 9 to 41% of the nitrogen fixed from the atmosphere is being transferred over to the other crop. And I thought that was quite phenomenal. And the neatest part is that the highest fixation transfer was when the rows were mixed together of the crops. So having those roots on top of each other really makes those transfers more efficient. Another thing we've been finding is any applied nitrogen just inhibits pea nodule formation and really does not translate to better yields or economics. It's just throwing money into the sky. However, phosphorus, if you apply that, it actually helped with nodulation. And if we're over yielding these crops, so we had more nodules per plant, the more the phosphorus was used or the higher the rate. If we're taking more yield off with these crops, we need to probably be applying more than we're used to with monocrops. So it's just another form of crop intensification. Now, in our organic situation, we also probably have to think that we're removing nutrients from that property more than we would be used to as well. So we have to have some plan to replace those nutrients. We've been finding that there's no light difference with pea canola for some reason. I thought there would be. We find that the canola matures up to 2 weeks earlier than the pea. Matures later, sorry. That can cause a problem. So you're kind of waiting on the canola to mature and the peas are almost snapping pods open. So it's best to kind of choose your varieties wisely to match up those maturities. We find there's reduced diseases in the pea when we intercrop, and I think it's just because they're off the ground, not getting disease tag from the soil. Larger canola seed is coming off. We have reduced pea aphids. We've actually counted aphids, and from plot to plot, you can tell which plots are intercrop and which are monocrop. So the monocrop has tremendous amount of aphids, and then 2 feet over in the intercrop, there's no aphids at all. And for whatever reason, the canola must stink or it tastes funny or something, but the aphids don't want to be in there at all. We found 100% pea rate for seeding rate is best, and then just having half a canola rate. So think of it as growing peas, but having canola as your weed, which is kind of like what Russell was getting at there. Having something there to fill in the gaps and pick up, you know, some nitrates that are kind of floating around. And then that's also a great chance to put in some alfalfa, especially with the Clearfield products. Work really good. And then if you're doing a forage pea, it can be more challenging because forage peas are so aggressive on the vegetative side. So just cut back on your pea rate and maybe boost up your broadleaf. And this is just an example of that. This is the top left is the forage pea that lays down all on its own. And just to its right is the intercrop of the same forage pea with canola. And if you could imagine harvesting that, would you rather scrape those peas off the ground, which were terrible when we did it, or pick them up when they're half standing with the canola? The farmer there with the combine, he had talked about he had a great land equivalent ratio of like 1.42 or something, but he had talked about how the combine had to work very hard to get that big crop into the combine, but it was certainly worth it. And then you can see some of the setups there with some of the different farms. Can get quite elaborate, or they can be quite simple. Um, it really depends on what works best for your situation, or kind of what resources you have. I have a lot of questions for pea canola or mustard pea, for example. Are mycorrhizal communities better off than just canola or mustard? I would assume so, but nobody's tested it. Do we get more pea leaf diseases in intercrops? I don't know. We've been unable to kind of pick that one up yet. Can we reduce root rots in pea intercrops? I don't know. We're still thinking about that one. Does intercropping promote inferior rotations, like what Russell was alluding to, possibly? That could be, but the power of diversity too could have a huge effect on that, and that's a spatial diversity, not a temporal diversity. So, plants are spaced out. Maybe those advantages are local, but over time, of course, it'll deteriorate possibly. Does intercropping in rotations have advantages to monocrop rotations like soil building, water use, fertilizer efficiency? I would think so. And we are potentially getting into a project with Dr. Linda Gorham at the University of Alberta to look into that. Is potassium and other nutrients like zinc, copper, boron in more demand too, like nitrogen and phosphorus were? I assume they would be if you're over yielding. So just keep that in mind. Does Piola reduce greenhouse gases better than monocrops? I don't know. That's work that needs to be done, but I assume that's possible. Can we design equipment that better suits intercrops? Absolutely. Can we use a variable rate Piola, for example, with both seed and fertilizer to be more efficient? So I have sort of an example here, a three-way mix that a producer did. This is on organic. They had peas, oats, and mustard at the same rate across the whole field. And as you can see, there's a bit of topography in the field. These crops sorted their own way out based on the topography. So we had the peas at the top of the hill, the oats on the slopes, and mustard at the bottom, taking advantage of whatever resources were best in their system. And there was not a single weed in this field. I could not find it. It was so competitive because wherever the plants decided to grow because of their situation, they choked out all the weeds. But they uniquely kind of made their own zones. And I think why can't we do a variable rate system for intercrops and potentially customize the fertility needs in those zones as well? Potential research to do anyway. And then there's some of the out intercrops, the ones that don't work, in my opinion. Faba bean buckwheat just had low land equivalent ratio. Faba bean flax was terrible to thresh because it's hard to get to the flax unless you're going to smash up the faba bean. The soybean flax was terrible just because of the chips, the water issues that we ran into with the flax. Then winter wheat, soybean relay. This is where you grow strips of winter wheat and then plant soybean in between, like you see on Twitter, maybe from the States. And it just doesn't work here. It's too dry here. The economics are poor, and really it wasn't much of a gain at all, maybe 10%, which doesn't pay for much when you're going over the field twice with each implement. The corn hairy vetch idea with the grain and silage, we've had harvesting issues with that, where the vetch gets caught into the corn header and tangles it up, or into the reaper of the silage unit. Then we've tried hemp and pea, and it just is poor timing for harvest. The peas are well mature, and the hemp is mid-September at best. So it just doesn't line up. And then the economics were poor for separating and dealing with green hemp seed with mature peas. This is what it kind of looks like in the harvest sample. And you can imagine trying to clean out that hemp when it's kind of green leaf and there's seed and peas and whatnot. So it just doesn't make any sense. And our winter wheat soybean concept there, it's a novel idea, but it just doesn't practically work. Another risky one we've tried is sunflower and hairy vetch. Works great, but it can cause harvest issues, just like the corn and hairy vetch did. And you can see the photo of the header there getting tangled up. And if you're in the organic business, please do not touch hairy vetch. It's just a hairy monster. It's too aggressive for organic. Intercropping popularity in Manitoba, we have mixed grain as what they quoted as in the insurance. We had about 8,700 acres in Manitoba. Manitoba has 11 million acres, so it's very not popular as much as we'd like it to be. The polycrop, well, this is where you're just mixing things together, like say it's oats and alfalfa or something. It's up to 16,000 acres in Manitoba. But again, 11 million acres, that's a drop in the bucket. Incentives and insurance for Manitoba. This is what we have. We have sometimes BMP programming, which pays for cleaning equipment, seeders, modifications, that sort of thing. But they discontinued that a couple of years ago. GARS, or Global Ag Risk Solutions, I called them up to see what they could offer. And they just look at your historical gross margins, and they make forward projections if you're trying to get that kind of income insurance. And then our local crop insurance has, you can get the mixtures for what it's put under the novel crops insurance. If you're doing intercrop for $9.12 an acre premium, and you get up to $400 coverage for that. And then if you're doing polycrop, it's $40 or $80 premiums. I think that seems high, but it's based on your that's just your insurance is $40 or $80 an acre based on establishment, and then they just look at your ground cover that you get. So talking about relay cropping, it's just having crops in succession. That's kind of the definition. Talked about the sunflowers. This is the field, what it looks like, and you can see the vetch getting up in the head of the sunflower. That can potentially be a problem at harvest. So, but it was great for bees, because after the sunflowers were done pollinating, the bees were on top of those vetch flowers and getting pollen from that. It's what it looked like after harvest. The producer actually went in and swathed this after the snow melted, re-harvested the vetch again, and then got another 400 pounds an acre of vetch on top of whatever he cleaned out in the sunflower sample. So he ended up selling that vetch for a couple years after. And we've been finding it does increase soil organic matter by 0.25% per year. There was about 2 tons per acre of available forage if you're going to send the animals out after harvest. We think the vetch fixed anywhere from about 60 to 136 pounds of nitrogen that did not come off the field. So it'll be there in the next rotation. and it reduced weeds by about 80% from what we could find in small plots. Now there's a big issue here, and that's the volunteer vetch seed that will grow and be a nightmare the year after. So you got to make sure your rotation's correct, especially in conventional, that you're using like a cereal so you can spray out the vetch plants. And then we don't know, but we think that sclerotinia was being transferred from the vetch to the sunflower physically. And also maybe we had some sunflower rust that was being aggravated by having such a dense canopy. Producers here have been putting some of the vetch in corn and grazing it. It's a great idea. It boosts your protein significantly and your relative feed values. A local producer here has bison, and they claim this was almost 10 years ago now, but a 40 cent per pound gain per day savings by having the vetch included. We've done lots of small plots for a couple of years and even a thesis. We have less weeds. We have about the same amount of biomass, so you're not losing on tonnage, but we lose 16% on grain yield on the corn by having the vetch. It's kind of parasitic, I guess. But if you're taking it for some sort of feed, there's no difference, and you're getting a better feed quality. So your energy levels are higher, your feed values, your protein, that sort of thing. And lots of good benefits I had summarized here. One of the weird things is you can actually use a half a liter of Roundup equivalent glyphosate on the vetch without hurting it. So it can, basically go on Roundup Ready corn, and you can spray your herbicide program without losing vetch. I think it's best in a grazing system. And of course, there's vetch seed that can form and create issues in your rotation again. The sweet clover idea here, this is a farmer who grew sweet clover and spring wheat together. Worked fantastic. There's what the windrow looks like, and this is organic. This is a saline area where the sweet clover was taking over from the wheat because the wheat did not want to grow there, but at least the sweet clover was, and I think it was mitigating these spots too. And this is the next year after the sweet clover growing. There's that saline spot again. It's shrunk in size, which is good. It's out competing some of the foxtail barley. And then in crop, it's it's over your head tall, and there's no weeds. And I think potentially, that farmer, what they did is they harvested this sweet clover for seed, but I like this idea of rolling the crop in order to grow another crop next year, planting winter wheat or rye into it and dealing with it that way. It's a quick way to deal with it, and if you're in the organic business, it's a great green manure system. So I think, if you're trying to establish clovers with the wheat, rainfall is required. That's number one. If you don't have rainfall, it's very hard to get those little seeds germinating and being competitive at the right time. If they come up late in the wheat stand, it's going to be out-competed. I think we can fix some of these saline spots, use water if we need to, if the wet cycle comes, and you can probably get on your field much earlier if you're in a wet cycle too. Just kind of wrapping up here, a long time ago in 2009, we did a project where we suppressed alfalfa. This is kind of thinking of Daniel here, where they chisel plowed through the alfalfa stand. And I agree, we got quite a good stand of canola. We were comparing whether to use glyphosate in the fall or the spring on the alfalfa, and compare it to a tillage pass. And by far the tillage pass was so dry, but it probably grew decent canola, but it was struggling with drought conditions. And some of the suppressed alfalfa where we're using low rates of glyphosate to just suppress the alfalfa actually worked very good. And we figure the optimum kind of best rate of using glyphosate was 0.5 liter in the fall, followed up by a 1 liter application pre-seed was enough to just set back the alfalfa and then allow the canola to grow. Certainly, we got a nutrient flush after the tillage application. We got nutrient flushes after the fall applications, but we had no nutrient flushes on spring applications. So just kind of a neat, novel way to grow canola. Take-home message is tillage creates drought conditions, but the highest nutrient flush fall applications help suppress the alfalfa and give a nutrient flush enough to grow a canola crop. And spring applications are actually quite futile with very little suppression of alfalfa. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. If you need to get a hold of me or if you want to follow me on Twitter, that's my information. I look forward to any questions right now. And why did I put, Brooker et al. 14. That's just a reference to a paper that just came out about intercropping and different combinations of crops. I think they put it all in a nice table with the benefits, and it's just a intercropping review for anyone that's interested. It's got lots of different combinations.
Thank you, Scott. It was a very wonderful presentation.